Well, hello and welcome to the Breakdown. I'm Jonathan, and today's episode is all about the musical alphabet. Whenever we're trying to communicate to one another as musicians, we have to know what we're talking about. If you're trying to tell me what notes to play, or if I'm trying to tell you what I've been playing, we all have to find ways to communicate these musical ideas to one another. And now there are various levels and layers of musical communication, whether it's through tablature or sheet music, chords, Nashville number systems. There's a lot of different ways, scales, modes. There's a lot of different levels to this. But they all come back to the basics of just your musical alphabet. Now, different instruments might have different ways of playing these notes, and they might have different ways of writing these notes. But they're all talking about the same notes. Little caveat here. For the sake of this video, we're going to be talking about Western music. These ideas wouldn't exactly translate if you were in places like India or Africa or parts of China and Asia. They have a completely different understanding of music than we do here in the West. But these ideas are going to transcend no matter what instrument or genre you're playing in Western music. We all come back to the same foundations of A through G and then back around again. And that's pretty simple. Just A through G. It uses our first 7 letters of our English alphabet. We even have a little melody to help remember it. I'm sure you learned it when you were 4 or 5, maybe a little bit earlier. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that's it. It's all. That's the core of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you can say that much of your alphabet, you're well on your way to understanding the musical alphabet. Now I'm sure you're saying, well, it looks like it might be a little bit more complicated than that. And it is, but not by much. Just A through G. Those letters, those 7 letters, are what we call the natural notes. They don't have any sharps or flats or little extra symbols beside them. It's just the letters. If you were to look at a keyboard, it'd be the white keys. Now, another little caveat here. A lot of times when we learn our musical alphabet, we'll start with the letter C and we'll work our way through. There are some practical reasons for that. But when we're just trying to understand this concept, I find it easier to take something that we already know and work from there than to try and mess with a system that we've already got. And since we already know our alphabet, I find it easier at the beginning just to start with the letter A, even though on a keyboard you would start with the letter C. And most of the time when we're looking at scales, we start with a C or near there. But again, for sake of our lesson today, we're just going to start with the letter A and work our way through. So it's A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then it repeats. And we'll talk about that repeat here in just a second. But it's just that simple, A through G. It's the white keys on a keyboard. Now, where we start to diverge from our normal alphabet is when we include things called accidentals. These are our sharps and flats, and you might have seen some of these symbols before. So the sharp symbol looks like a pound sign or a hashtag for the younger generation. It's a hashtag. Sharp. And that word means high or higher. You can think of it in kind of degrees. If you're trying to play a certain note, and maybe you're just a little bit past it, a little bit higher than that, you could say you're a little sharp. I'm sure many people have heard that when they're trying to sing. But you could also say that somebody has gone so far sharp that they have become a completely different note. It's a note directly behind it, or directly after it, I should say. So sharp just means high or higher. The opposite of that would be flat. And flat kind of looks like an italics B. And maybe you've heard that word before too while you're trying to sing. And flat just means the opposite. It's low or lower. So, if you were trying to sing a particular note and you were just a little lower than where you needed to be, you could say you were singing flat. Or you could say that somebody has gone so far flat that they've actually become a different note, different sound altogether. So, how does this apply to the musical alphabet that we already have up here? Well, it fills in the gaps. These accidentals, these sharps and flats, are the black keys on our keyboard. So, let's start with sharps. If I have a C and I go to the note that is higher than C, I would call that C sharp. Likewise, if I have a D and I go so far above D that I become a completely other note, I would call that D sharp. And this idea would continue for almost all of our natural notes. Again, we're going to talk about this in a second, but it comes back around. It's just a big loop. Okay. So, every single natural note has a sharp except for two. Two notes, two letters, I should say, don't have sharps. And those are B and E. You could also remember bacon and eggs. That's how I kept it straight when I was learning it. Every single letter has a sharp except for B and E, bacon and eggs. So, when we're first learning our musical alphabet, it's important just to say these letters in order. We did it when we were kids, when we were learning our alphabet, and we can do it now as we're learning our musical alphabet. So, why don't you say it with me? Okay, we're going to start on A, and we're going to go till we get back to A. Ready? A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and A. And that's it. It's just that simple. A through G, and every letter has a sharp except for B and E, bacon and eggs. Now I'm sure you're wondering, okay, you filled out all the spots and you don't have any room for the flats. So what do we do with flats? I'm glad you asked. These letters have multiple names. These notes have different names. Let's look at it like this. My dad. I call him Dad. He's the generation above me. But my grandpa doesn't call my dad Dad. He calls him Son. So since I'm looking up at him, it's Dad. My grandpa is looking down, it's Son. But he's the same person. He just has two different roles or two different names that he could be called. In the same way, sharps and flats work interchangeably for the same note. So, let's take, for example, this D sharp. We can see that it's the note that's higher than D. So, we would use the word sharp because it's higher. D sharp. But if we were looking at it from the other perspective, we could say that it's the note that is lower than E, in which case we could also call it E flat. Both would be true. It's two names for the same sound, the same note. And that would be true for every single one of these sharps. This C sharp could also be known as D flat. This A sharp could also be called B flat. And so on and so forth, all the way through our musical alphabet. Now, I know that can get kind of tricky when you're trying to just learn the musical alphabet, but it's important to know so that later on you don't get confused when somebody says B flat. Well, it's just an A sharp. Or somebody says E flat. It's just a D sharp. Both are true. It depends on the context you're in. It depends on the instruments you might be using. It depends on some just common language that might be associated with a certain genre. Right? Just like in America, we have tons of different accents depending on where you go. You have different slang terms. Somebody might call it soda, somebody might call it pop. It depends on the context you're in. And so it's important to know that these words are interchangeable, or these names are interchangeable for the same note. But when you're just learning it, you can just do what we've done just a couple minutes ago. A through G, every note has a sharp except for B and E, bacon and eggs. And you can just stick to sharps. For the most part, when we're looking at fretted instruments, we tend to use sharps more than flats. That's the case by case, person by person. I tend to use the word flat when it comes to B flat and E flat, but otherwise I just call them sharps. So it's a matter of preference, it's a matter of situation, but when we're learning it, you can just say the word sharp, and that'll be helpful. So, again, when we're practicing through this, we're just going to say it. A sharp, B, C, C sharp, all the way through. But we're also going to try and say it backwards. Now, I was never very good at saying my actual alphabet backwards, but I can say my musical alphabet backwards. It's because I have to. But when we're learning it, we need to learn it in reverse as well as we do forwards. So we can try to say it backwards. A, G sharp, G, F sharp, F, E, D sharp, D, C sharp, C, B, A sharp, A. That'll also really help you understand it. And it'll help us even more here in a second when we're trying to find it on our instrument. We're trying to find a particular note on our instrument. So say it forwards and say it backwards. And for now, just use sharps. But as you get more comfortable with it, try saying it in flats. And then try mixing and matching. That'll really help solidify in your brain. Okay. Now, before we get to the instruments, I want to bring up one thing. Okay, so there's 12 different notes here. But when I look on a guitar or a piano or a ukulele, it seems like a lot more notes than just 12. And that's because these notes are in a continual loop, higher and higher and higher, or lower and lower. They're the same 12 notes, just higher versions or lower versions. We use the term octave, and we get that oct from the idea of there's 7 notes, 7 different letters, and then we go back to the 1. So 7 and then 1 is where the repeat is, so 8 octave. And so that's just the letters. And there's some things about that when it comes to scales and modes and stuff like that, but don't worry about it. Just know octave. Octave, it's where those notes repeat. You can think of it like model cars or model trains. You could have a 1-to-1, which is the model is the exact same size as the car, or you could have a 1-to-2 scale. So it's the same car, it's maybe like a Corvette. A 1-to-2 scale model would be a Corvette, but at just half the size. Everything is shrunk down half size. Or a 1-to-4, so everything is quarter of the size, and so on and so forth. The same way, these notes are the same notes, just higher versions or lower versions. So whenever we're practicing our musical alphabet, it's important to just keep repeating through them in a complete loop. Okay? So, now let's talk about how this works on our instruments. So, here I have my guitar, and we're going to try and learn how this musical alphabet applies to an instrument, a fretted instrument like this. And it's simpler than you think. You look at all these frets across these 6 strings, and it's easy to get lost. But at its core, it's just knowing where do we start in this musical alphabet. And we learn that from our tuning. So for a standard guitar, acoustic or electric, the tuning is E, A, D, G, B, E. And you'd start with your thickest string here, and that's your E, A, D, G, B, and E. 6 strings. There's some different ways to remember that. Maybe you've heard of Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie, or every amateur does get better eventually, or elephants and donkeys have big ears. And there's a number of phrases to help us remember that. But once we understand the tuning of the instrument that we're playing, then we can just drop in on our musical alphabet. So take, for example, this low E string. It's the thickest string that we have on our guitar. So it's an E. And I don't have to use any fingers to play it. It's just open E. Open meaning I'm not pushing down with my fretting hand. Open E. So we would drop in on this musical alphabet here at the E. And again, I'm not putting any fingers down. I'm not playing any frets. So it's just 0. Open. Then, as I move to the next fret, which would be the first fret, I would then just move to the next note, which would be an F. I move my finger again up to the second fret, and you can hear how the note is changing higher. So I'm going up higher to the next fret, and here on the second fret, that's an F sharp. I keep going, third fret, it's a G. Fourth fret, again, continually going higher up my fretboard. After G, it's a G sharp. Fifth fret is an A. Because again, these notes are just continually looping around and around and around. So once I get to the end, to this G sharp, I keep going to A. So that's the 5th fret. Now I move up again to the 6th fret. So I'm on this A sharp. To B, 7th fret. B doesn't have a sharp, so as I go to the 8th fret, go higher again. I'm on a C. C sharp's on the 9th fret. D's on the 10th. D sharp is on the 11th. And now I take one more step and I'm on the 12th fret. And this has me back to my starting point, which in this case, on this string, was an E. So I've made it through all 12 notes, and I've come back to the beginning of where I started, which is an E. Now the great thing about most guitars, basses, and ukuleles is they have these little dots, these little inlays. If they're not on the fretboard, they're usually on the top of the fretboard here. And on almost every guitar, bass, ukulele, mandolin, any fretted instrument, most of them will have a double dot on the 12th fret. And so that's where that string repeats. Because remember, we've only got 12 different notes. So if we start with 0 and we move 12 times, we'll come back around to where we started, which is on this string, the E. That's true for every single one of our strings. So for the A string, which is the next string down, I would start with an open A, and then as I move fret by fret, I'm changing the notes. So A sharp, B doesn't have a sharp, so we go to C, C sharp, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G sharp, and here I am back at the double dots again, 12th fret, I'm back at A. So whenever you're learning to play your fretted instrument, first step is knowing what's the tuning for that instrument. Then the next step from there is go string by string and say the note that you're playing. String by string, fret by fret, work your way from the open string or open fret all the way down to the 12th fret. Now, if you say you're on the B string and you work your way, starting with 0, all the way through to the 12th fret, and you end up saying C, well, that should clue you in that somewhere along the way you've made a mistake. Because at the 12th fret, we go back to where we started for that string. So on the G string, if I work my way through and I get to the 12th fret, I should get back to G. If I haven't gotten back to G, maybe I'm on an F sharp, well, then I've miscounted somewhere. The opposite's also true. We need to work this going backwards. So we need to start on our 12th frets and work back to the open string. So take this D string, for example. I can go down to the 12th fret, which is the double dots, and I can work my way back, starting with D, C sharp, C, B, A sharp, A, G sharp, G, F sharp, F, E, D sharp, D. Open string. Now, if I'd gotten back to that open string and I wasn't saying D, again, I've miscounted somewhere. So, no matter what instrument you play, find the tuning and then work through your musical alphabet just like that. If you've got a ukulele, the tuning for most ukuleles, other than like baritone ukulele, is going to be a G, C, E, A. Giant cats eat a lot. That's just one of the phrases that I've learned with this. But the same rules apply. I start on a G string here, and the very next fret, so open G, would be G sharp, then A, and then I would keep going all the way down to my little 12th fret here, and that would be a higher G. On a bass guitar, the tuning is pretty much the same as an electric or an acoustic guitar, only we don't typically have the two higher strings down here. Sometimes you'll get a 5-string or a 6-string bass, and those have a little bit different tunings. But for a bass guitar, standard 4-string bass, it's E, A, D, and G. Probably can't hear that, I don't have it plugged in, but that's the tuning. It's just the lowest 4 strings of an acoustic or an electric guitar. And the rules would apply. Even though these frets are a lot bigger and the strings are a lot longer, still the same rules apply. Here's my D string, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, all the way down to the 12th fret, back at D. So no matter what fretted instrument you have, work at it like that. Go string by string, fret by fret, until you get down the idea of moving through this musical alphabet. Now, there are a couple key ways on memorizing this, and I'll go into greater depth in a different video, but here's the basics of one of these methods. Learn the dots. Learn the dots. When we first start out, it's important just to know the open strings, E, A, D, G, B, E, or G, C, E, A, whatever instrument you might have, whatever the tuning is. Learn the open strings for that, and learn the 12th frets, which are just the same thing, but then learn the dots. Most fretted instruments have these inlays on them, these little dots, and they're there as road markers to help you find your way around your instrument, so you can easily see where you're at. So you don't just get lost in a sea of frets and strings. They're there for a reason, to help you know where you're at. So learn the dots. Take 2 strings and memorize the notes that are on those dots. That'll help give you shortcuts as you're navigating this. So if I were to say, play a D sharp on the A string, I don't have to start from A and go A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's time consuming. It's good to do it first, but it's not a great way to work through when you're just trying to play a song. So you memorize the dots. I know that the 5th fret of the A string is a D note. I've memorized that. And so I can go D, D sharp. And that's cut my time in half, at least, of finding where these notes are. You can do the same thing with your instruments. So let's take a quick second to review these different concepts and how you need to practice them. First, our musical alphabet has 7 different letters, and they're the first 7 letters of our English alphabet: A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And these letters repeat infinitely, higher and lower. As soon as you get to G, you come back around to the next A. If you go below A, you go back to the previous G. It just keeps on going. A through G. That's it. Then, with each of those letters, they all have sharps, except for which 2? B and E, bacon and eggs. A through G, everything's got a sharp except for B and E. The best way to practice it is to just say it, just like you did when you were a kid with your alphabet. From there, we want to apply that to our instrument. So that means we have to learn the tuning for the instrument that we have, and there are plenty of resources to do that. Once we have that, then we need to practice saying that alphabet string by string, fret by fret. Dropping in here based on what string we're at, and then moving through. Every next fret is the next highest note. So if I'm on an open E string, the next note, the next fret, is F. Everything repeats at the 12th fret, so whenever we're practicing, we can just go open string to 12th fret, and we should be back where we started. If we're not, we've miscounted somewhere. And then we want to try to do that backwards, just as we did going forwards. Then, to help speed this along, we need to memorize the dots. That's what they're there for, to help us navigate. Anyways, I hope this all helped. If you have any questions or you would like to do a deeper dive into understanding how we got to just 7 letters, why don't we use 12 letters, what's the point of sharps and flats, let me know. I'd be happy to make another video about that, looking into some of the more nuanced details. Anyways, happy playing, and I'll see you next time.